Hey, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Mindset Explosion Season 4, Episode 4. I'm very excited, being joined tonight by Serena Gay, and we are going to talk a little bit about podcasting. I want to find out how Serena got into this because for me, it just seemed like you had a dream job going around the world with the BBC as a journalist. Was that kind of the case, Serena? Or
No. No, that was kind of like in my early part of my broadcasting career. I worked for BBC World Service, but I was actually in the main newsroom in London, and that was very exciting. I was there for the night that the first Gulf War broke out, and I was actually the one that broke the fact of it happening to the newsroom. And yeah. So I've had some interesting times, but in fact, not that long after all that, I then went to live in Germany with my new husband, and I ended up working for German television's their international satellite English news service, which is called Deutsche Welle TV or DWTV, and they broadcast in lots of different languages, just like the BBC World Service. And so I ended up presenting and doing production work for their English language news service, and I stayed in Berlin for 20 years. So so not all over the world, but definitely Berlin, and that was an extraordinary experience, I can tell you, watching or seeing or testifying or just being around as Berlin kind of rose from the ashes of the Cold War after reunification, seeing the two parts of the city come together. That was really I suppose the experience of my life. But anyway, so not a BBC roving reporter as such, I'm afraid.
No, but that must have been that sounds interesting. 'Cause like you said, that would have been right at the start. Well, as the Berlin was changing in the world it is now. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, that just to put it all into context in a way for you, not long after we arrived, my husband and I stopped what we were doing in Berlin and started to run our own business. So we started offering historic walking tours in English. So I carried on working for the broadcaster, but my husband Nick was the main man in running this business, although I helped him too. And we really did see we couldn't have chosen something that would reveal more to us the way the city was changing than by doing these historic walking tours. And literally parts of East Berlin, I remember, were Dickensian. They were desperate. They were, slums, not all of it by any means, but parts. And to see those rise and actually become quite yuppified and really kind of trendy over the years, we were there for 20 years, was just an amazing thing. And, to see what were, well, sort of amazing building sites produce the most wonderful buildings and fill in all these like parking lots and empty spaces that had been left after the bombing of the Second World War and never really nothing done with them, by the East German government. To see after reunification these lots being turned into amazing constructions, amazing buildings, amazing places to live, all that, although it made it very difficult to actually live in the city while it was going on, all this reconstruction, it was still an amazing thing to be able to witness and something that, defines my life in a way. So, yeah, it was quite an experience.
I guess, I guess you would have been around quite a growth kind of mindset at the time. Obviously it's something that's about renewal, isn't it? At that time, that must have had a huge impact. I haven't really thought about it now, to be honest. It's just as you're talking about it. Yeah.
Yes, and I think it had an interesting effect on the peoples of the two parts of Berlin. So in the east, you had the East Berliners who many of them felt that the West had come in and just kind of reclaimed them without really any permission as such, and sort of made what they had achieved under the East German government or regime, however you want to refer to it, made their achievements seem small and insubstantial. And so there was a lot of bad feeling at the start. A lot of people weren't happy with what was going on. But what was fascinating to see as the years went by, well, to begin with, you could really tell the difference between the East Germans and the West Germans, or the East Berliners and the West Berliners. The East Berliners had quite badly cut hair. They didn't dye their hair very well. Their clothes were badly cut, cheap. I sound as if I'm being very negative here, but there was a difference between the way the East Berliners were turned out and the way the West Berliners were turned out. But then as the years went on, that differentiation disappeared, and you could no longer say that person is from the East and that person is from the West. And bit by bit, the city came back together. And by the time we left after 20 years, it was much more of a cohesive entity. And I think people stopped feeling embittered about what had happened, because in fact there was some embitterment on the West side as well, because their taxes were increased in order to pay for the renovation of the East. And by the time we left, I think the country was much more united, or reunited. So yes, you're right. There was this mindset, and it took a while to gel, this mindset of we're all in it together and we're all going to come out of it with something much stronger and much better. That took a long time to come together.
I guess that's life in general, isn't it? And even though it's the Berlin same city, it's two cultures really, wasn't it, coming together? Do you feel like they learned a lot off each other?
Interesting question.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure. I think, to be honest, it's the story of the victor, isn't it?
Yeah.
The West won. And when that's the case, they impose their mores and their expectations and their standards on the loser. And I think, I think that was really what happened. I'm not sure that they learnt very much from each other, because I think the West was only too keen to forget the communist past. And I think there were many in the East Berlin part, or in the East Germany, who actually were quite keen to up their living standards and move into a new world, but not everybody was. So yeah.
No, fair enough. Anyway, moving on a little bit. when I do get sidetracked sometimes, Serena, but it was interesting.
History lesson, yeah.
That must have been, so you were obviously working in journalism when you first went to Berlin, and then you decided to change, quite a career change, to do tour guide, or to set up a business. How was that? What kind of, I'm doing this now? What spurred that on, and what happened eventually in the end?
Well, just to be clear, I kept my broadcasting work going simultaneously, and it was really my husband that ran the family business, although I was involved and I did do a lot for it. But what really spurred us into doing it was two things. First, money, which is always an important thing. The job that originally took us out there was my husband's job, and that actually came to an end for reasons I won't go into here, but it wasn't really his fault. It was just how it worked. And we didn't want to go back to England with our tail between our legs, not having achieved something in Berlin. And simultaneously, we ourselves were exploring the city just off our own bat. And, we were really interested to find out where all this Nazi history had taken place. And, where, for example, Hitler's bunker, where he spent his last few days before he committed suicide, where was that? How could you find that? And so we were on our own little, quest to find out where all these places were. And then one day we sort of thought, you know what? There is nothing in this city for tourists who visit to show them where all these historic sites of, the infamous Nazi history took place. Why don't we do that? Why don't we put together our own history walk? Now, I should explain that my husband is really an historian. That was his background. He studied history at Cambridge, and that was his first love. And so it just seemed like the obvious thing to do. And we were the very first to start offering tours in English, serious historic tours to sites of infamous Nazi interest or Nazi history. And it took off, I can tell you, and it was tremendously popular. And we grew from that point. So not only did we offer Nazi history tours, we then offered Jewish life tours, a general history tour of the city, spies tour, a Potsdam tour. We did all sorts of different things, and it was terribly interesting for us in so many different ways. But that was the original sort of motivation, was A, money, and B, nobody's offering this. Why don't we do it? Yeah. So that's how it all started.
Brilliant. And then obviously you came back to England.
We did. After 20 years away, we decided that by that time we had a small family. We had 2 boys, and we decided that actually, because we'd had the kids relatively late, we had kept asking ourselves this question: if we stay here, do we want to stay in Berlin? Because if we do, our children will feel that Germany is their home. Now, we had 20 good years in Germany. We really did. But we did want our boys to feel that they belonged to the country that we came from, so that they felt English. So we decided when they were sort of 10 and 13 that we should come back to this country, and that's what we did. And we did it for them, really. And I think we achieved what we set out to achieve. They feel English, but they love Germany and they love going back. They are bilingual, and that has stood them in the most incredibly good stead. And we had to start again when we came back here. And I can tell you that has been a journey in itself. Quite
Challenging.
Yes. Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Pleased to be here. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, it's a brave move.
It was.
And obviously, I think as we get older, it becomes even more braver because I got to start again. But you must be happy with your choice, right?
Totally, because this country is home, really, ultimately, and good though the years were that we had in Berlin. I mean, we had a great company, great people working for us. We had a lovely house. At the end of the day, we never really felt that we totally belonged. And so it's nice to come home and just belong again and not be the foreigner.
I know that one.
Yeah. Do you know that one, Matt? Have you lived abroad?
Only traveled. I haven't really lived. I spent probably about a year and a half traveling around, and there's a few times where obviously maybe just being the only white person in the area I was at, just put the shoe on the other foot for a change.
Yeah.
Great times, but yeah, nothing for as long as what you have. But I can relate to life changes and just up and right, I'm going to change my career now, and let's do this. It's a brave move, but I feel that if it's in your heart, you got. I heard something there, and it was said, "Follow your heart, but take your head with you." I thought they were wise words.
Quite tricky to do that, though, Matt.
Tricky. I know. Yeah, and maybe take your gut, listen to your gut at the same time. So, when you came back to England, did you go straight back into broadcasting?
No, and in fact, that was my problem. Was I had not envisaged that when I came back to this country, already in my sort of 50s, that I would have such difficulty getting a job. And the truth is that nobody wanted to employ me because my skills were kind of off the scale, really. They just were weird ones. And so I had to reinvent myself. And at that, that was difficult to suddenly realize that I was on, despite the fact that I had incredible amount of experience in so many different ways. I just couldn't get anybody to respond to my approaches or applications or anything. So that was quite tough. That took me a while to come to terms with. And I did reinvent myself, though, as a voiceover artist. And I taught myself the skill of audio editing, which was so foreign to me. I can't tell you, because, up to that point, I'd always worked with audio engineers. They'd always done the job. All I'd had to do was sit in front of a microphone and sound pretty, or write my scripts, maybe. Yes, no problem. But I didn't actually have to fiddle around with audio and sound waves and luffs and well, you have to really be into audio engineering to know what a luff is. You probably know what a luff is, Matt. No, you don't. Okay, all right. So I'm not going to go into it now, but it's a way of normalizing your audio so that you have the right volume. And so all this kind of technology was like so foreign to me, but I taught it to myself. I got there. I became quite good at it, and I launched myself as a voiceover artist, only to find, Matt, that it is the most boring thing on this planet to do. I mean, it's all very well reading a bedtime story to a child who responds, who listens, who gets excited. It's altogether another thing to read a book to yourself effectively, day in, day out, and to have nobody responding, no comeback. It's dull. It's kind of ridiculous, actually, just to talk to yourself all day long. So I actually found that I was bored to tears doing that.
I can imagine.
Yeah. So then I had to reinvent myself again, which is where the podcasting came in. But that's another story. I don't know. Do you want me to launch into that?
Yeah, well,
why not?
Definitely. Because you have 2 podcasts, is that right now at the moment?
I have 2 of my own podcasts, correct? But I launched myself as a podcast producer for companies. So what I do is I go into a company, I help them launch a podcast, and then I help them continue to operate it if that's what they want me to do. But alongside that, I also run 2 podcasts. One is a Gloucestershire-based podcast about businesses and how they're surviving the challenges of the lockdown and of the pandemic. And my other podcast is how to make your own business podcast, and it's called Podcast Launchpad. So so not only do I do it for companies, do I produce them, but I also teach people how to do it for themselves. And that was something I kind of had to start doing during the pandemic, because of course business kind of ground to a halt, and I needed to pivot, or in my case pirouette, into into some sort of aligned form of podcasting that wasn't actually working with companies or going into a workplace. And now things are coming back together again for me. So the pirouette is beginning to pay off. But it was tricky to begin with. But I realized that in 2018 that I had all the skills to become a podcast producer. I have a radio and TV background, writing for broadcast, audio engineering. I've done a ton of voicing work, so I know how to use my voice. And thanks to my work with family businesses, I'm quite sort of familiar with social media and marketing. So all these skills, were ripe really for putting together to become a podcast producer. And this country has been relatively slow to get with the podcasting vibe, right? I don't know. I can see you're laughing there, Matt. And I think that must be because you're aware of, because you were, I guess you must have been ahead of the crest of the wave. You've been doing your podcast for a long time now. How many years is it? Is it 4?
Yeah, well, we just started. This is starting my 4th year, so it did start off as Facebook Live, and I remember at one of my masterminds they talked about the podcasting, and I assumed I got to get the setup, and I think did you know Robin Wade?
I do know him, yes,
Yeah,
although
yeah.
not terribly well, but I know
Oh
of him.
no,
Yeah,
no.
yeah.
One of my mentors at some point in the UK, and he said, "Why don't you just download it to audio? You can do that." All right, okay. Well, that makes life so much easier. So I uploaded everything there. So in theory, podcast is probably about 2 or 3 years, but as a whole, all my content, is getting onto the 4-year mark. I found it easier if I just said I got an episode, and it made me make sure I'm back the following week, basically. But I think I said to you off air that a lot of training, I went over to America, and I feel obviously a lot of the time it's just the way it is. It's just a little bit more ahead of the game over there. Of course, so it was nice to have just that other platform, and I think it's great that I love similar, because you interviewed a lot of people from around Gloucestershire, and I think that's so beneficial to those businesses. It's just you get your voice heard, and it's just having that highlight, and to get in front of your viewers. And I know from like what people say to me is I'd never considered something like that before, and I think it's a great platform, isn't it?
It really is. And, there's something really terrific about using your voice to communicate with your potential clients. Make your voice familiar with people, and they will trust you. And, they will trust what you have to say to them. I know I'm now kind of lapsing into my sales
Yeah, let's
spiel
go.
about why podcasting is such a brilliant idea.
Yeah,
But,
it is so.
what better than to be able to literally have that contact with your client, than to be able to speak to them directly, and for them to listen to you. I mean, the podcast statistics over, how many people will listen to the end of a podcast are mind-blowing. Don't ask me to repeat them here, because I never remember statistics, but it's something like 60% of people, listening to a podcast will listen to the end of it once they get involved with it. And that, what salesperson anywhere can rely on being able to get their message across to so many people in that way, using their own voice? I mean, I think it's magical. I really do. And I'm about to have a good cough. Hang on a minute. I don't have corona, I promise.
Bless you.
Just a bit dry.
No, it is true. And I figure that, I mean, would you say it's for any business? Can any business go out and do a podcast?
I don't see why not. If you have an expertise, then there will be people out there who want to know about it.
Yeah.
If you're a carpenter, there'll be people who want to know, how do you make a table? How do you make shelves? If you're a plumber, there'll be people wanting to know, how do I deal with an emergency? If you're, oh gosh, if you're have some kind of medical expertise, people will want to know about it. I honestly don't think there is any profession out there where people aren't curious to know how you do it. And then, of course, on top of that, there are people interested in your offers. And let's say you're a retailer, let's say you sell clothes. Well, why don't you have a podcast about your latest stock, about, or about the stock you have that you want to sell off? You can talk about it. There's so many different ways of making a podcast work for you, and you don't have to talk about your business or about your expertise. You can do it in a kind of oblique way. There's a cookery school. This is one of my favorite examples. There's a cookery school out there that has managed to, it's very clever, they've managed to get hold of some of the contestants that were in the Great British Bake Off, and they have them on every week. And every time there's a new season of Bake Off, they discuss each episode in detail. And I mean, for me, as a Great British Bake Off fan, I find it absolutely fabulous listening. And they pick apart the dishes or the bakes that these contestants produced, and they talk about their own experiences when they were on the show. And the cookery school that hosts the podcast, they make use of it by getting the people that are the hosts of the podcast to talk about what the Cookery School does in terms of its courses. So not only do they talk about the program, the Bake Off, but they also talk about what the podcast host does or offers in terms of cookery courses. So you can be a bit inventive and clever about it, and you can make a wonderful program to listen to. So yeah, I think it's such an imaginative means of getting your voice out there and getting people to listen to you. As you can tell, I'm a big fan.
No, yeah, me too. I love it. But it's so true. And I guess even if, like you said, if you're not sure, you can interview someone. It doesn't always have to be that. But I think someone just got to be the expert in, just got to know 2% more than someone else, right?
Yes. I mean, I think, if you're going to do a podcast series about your expertise, you probably know a lot more than 2.5%
Yes,
than
I know.
anybody else. But, we all of us, no matter what we do, we have a knowledge. We have, we have something to give to other people. So yeah. So what do you give, Matt? What's your what's your expertise? It must be health, fitness,
Yeah,
martial art.
well, obviously, my business is martial arts and fitness. Our unique selling point for teaching martial arts was always about personal development. And as I step back a little bit more from teaching, obviously, the instructors there, they're incorporating those things. And martial arts is very much personal development. My instructor encouraged me so much to listen to things like Anthony Robbins and the 7 Habits. And we'd be talking about this as I'm teaching. So this was my platform to share with someone that maybe may not want to do martial arts. And then I had a bit of an interest in finding out about local businesses or people of interest, and finding out how their mindset works, which of course is why we talked about that. So that's I like to inspire, I guess. But and sometimes with the interview, it's a little bit less work for me.
That's the beauty of the interview, isn't it?
Yeah.
But you do, I mean, if you're going to do an interview podcast, you do need to make sure that whomever you choose as your interviewee for that particular episode, that they're a sort of confident kind of person, that they're articulate, that they enjoy talking, and that they've got something to say, because it can fall flat if you choose someone who isn't very sort of reliable in that way. So yeah, you do need to be careful with your guests.
Yeah, I agree. I've not had maybe 1 or 2. I just thought, I want this to end. But mostly, I think because I don't know how you felt when you were talking to people about, because they're talking about their own business. Some people do get quite nervous, and then afterwards, I want to do that again. Oh my God! I say, I told you.
Yes,
Just talk about, and it. Maybe I've got a bit of a gift for, probably, you're a journalist, so it is sometimes you've got to dig in a little bit and dive in and find out. That's generally why I have a little chat before. It stays fresh in my head. But sometimes in that pre-chat, someone will say something, and if they are a bit nervous, they might forget what they've been talking about. And I'm like thinking, so someone will be talking. Sometimes I did at the early days, Serena, I'd forget to listen because I'm thinking, right, in a minute, I'm going to bring up what they wanted to talk about, like your podcast, those things. But I enjoy it. I think it's become a little bit of a hobby more for me now.
Okay. Right. Have you ever had anybody who's died on you, like sort of said, Matt, I don't know what to say?
No, I don't think so. I can't think of a time where that's happened. Maybe I get a feel when someone's nervous, and obviously, my job was about bringing up people's confidence and getting them to realize that. So I guess just lead it. Have you had that situation, or?
Well, yes, but then I pre-record, so I never do anything live. Although that's something that, perhaps down the line I'll do. But no, normally I pre-record. And so what I have had is occasionally I've had somebody say, oh no, I didn't want to say that, or oh no, can I start again? And that's fine, because I can just cut it out.
Yeah.
It's not a problem. And so I don't mind that happening. But I don't think I've ever had anybody on who's like completely frozen up on me. And that's probably because it's pre-recorded and they know it doesn't matter. And maybe because I also say to them at the start, whatever you do, whatever mistake you make, it doesn't matter, because I can cut it out. And I think that helps put people at their ease. So, no. And also I do prepare my guests too. I mean,
Yeah.
I do try to have like a 10-minute chat with them, not on the day of recording, funnily enough. I try to do it a bit in advance. And then I sort of pick their brains about their biographies and what they've done. And I actually say to them, what do you really want to talk about? And that's a really good question to ask, because then you know, you get the gist of what they feel comfortable about or with, and so then you ask the right questions. And so, yeah, so I tend not to ask people questions that I know will trip them up. I'm not
No,
trying to be
yeah,
Jeremy Paxman or anything.
yeah,
Yeah, I want to bring them out.
yeah.
I want to get them to talk about what they feel comfortable and talking about, and to show them off at their best. So yeah, that's totally the way I do things. But then, of course, I do have this solo podcast Launchpad, it's called, which is all about how to do your own podcast. And then it's just me talking. So there's no problem about people freezing there.
No, brilliant. And I love that, because you're making the pod when it's an interview, and I feel you're making the podcast about the person that's coming on. I think that's so important, because it's easy to say, oh, this is, it's your podcast, but in a way it becomes, for them. And I think that's really important. Yeah, definitely. So,
Yeah.
So your single, so the podcast want to talk about as well is how to do your own podcast. So when that's available now, that's
Podcast Launchpad, absolutely.
yeah.
That came out. That I started doing that about. Let me see. I've just done the 8th episode, or at least that's going to launch next week. So yeah, so I'm only a couple of months into it, and actually I love it, because it's what I know, right? Podcasting. So I can talk about all the different minutiae, all the different little niche interests to do with it. And so for me, it's just a joy to be able to talk about it. But they are really bite-sized episodes. So they take about 6 to 8 minutes each to listen to, really short. And I did that on purpose, because I want people just to be able to dive in and listen, and not have to, work their way through a whole load of banter and unnecessary chit chat. I just want people to be able to get straight in to what message I am conveying. So yeah, they're really short. I call them fun-sized, because you can just listen to them and at any time of the day, and they'll fit into any slot that you choose. And it's all part really of my sort of building my presence online in order to launch a course ultimately at some stage down the line, probably late spring, on how to make your own business podcast. Because there are lots of people out there who would love to use this marketing tool to promote themselves, but just don't know where to start. And, are ready to do it for themselves, but they've got so many questions that they need answering. And I think, yeah, this is something I could do to be useful. So this is what I'm doing.
I think that's fantastic, and obviously I realised the many benefits of it, and because of your experience, I think, oh my gosh, they're getting so much from that, and I like the fact it's those bite-sized chunks, because again, if it's someone in business, probably we haven't got much time in our hands, but we should make some time. But the benefits are so huge, and like what you said, I get you start to have a relationship, and everything is about relationships. Even when we go to the shop, and you told me something great about what you do when you go to the when you're at the till, you try and make that person smile. And I love that. That was your mum's very. I'm caught up on one, but it's about relationship, isn't it?
Yeah. I should say I should explain that my mother had this thing, that she didn't like to leave a supermarket without having made the person who served her at the till smile. That was her big thing. And, so if she happened to come across somebody who looked really glum, she made it her day's mission to make that person laugh or chat to them or just open them up. She was a social worker, my mother, so
Oh,
maybe that was kind of, what made her tick, was to help people and be kind to them. But she was very good at that, and I picked that up too now. I just cannot go to the supermarket, even in these days of COVID, without actually talking to somebody and kind of having a nice human exchange, because isn't that what life is all about,
yeah, I
Now,
agree.
Matt,
Yeah.
talking about what life is all about, it's my husband's birthday
I
today.
know, I know, I know. We were going to cut this off at 8.
And we of course were supposed to be like going out for a meal or doing, but then, lockdown happened. So I promised him a lovely meal for tonight.
Oh,
And so I suppose I should run back into the kitchen and make sure
of
it's
course.
not burnt to a cinder. But it's been really nice talking to you. And I hope that this episode is a useful one for you. And I hope it brings in a few listeners.
No, well, hopefully we
Mm.
get some people onto your show, and please, obviously enjoy the celebrations. But drop in any extra links into the comments. And of course, anyone that's watching, if you want to find out more, definitely, I think whether you would be a business or you just have something to talk about, I think it's just worth getting on there. You'll learn so much through Serena as well, and I think what a great thing. I look forward to you launching your course, and let me know, and I'll push it out there for you as well, of course. All right.
Thank you, Matt.
All
Thank you.
right.
It's been a lovely chat this evening, a lovely way to spend a Sunday evening. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. My pleasure. Thank you, everybody. I will be back next week. Same time, same channels. All right. Peace and love. Bye-bye.